Well, hello, everybody. My name is Dan Skip Allen. I'm laughing because I'm thinking about something that someone likes to do an impersonation of me. So I was thinking about the person's impersonation of me. But this is the latest episode of the Top 5 Weekly. And this week, in honor of Deepwater Horizon, we're going to do disaster films. And what a disaster film that was. Wow, what a great film. If you haven't seen Deepwater Horizon, I highly recommend it. It's a fantastic film. So I'm going to introduce my panelists. Once again, we got Andrew, we got Stephen back again. We got a friend from the past has joined us. His name is Billy. So starting with Andrew, introduce yourselves.
Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew, back again, once again, to talk more movies. This week, disaster movies, which, of all the topics we've had, I found this one to be the toughest to make a top 5 list for.
All right, Billy.
Hello, my name is Billy Pallahan, and I have actually known Dan before this show, and he's talking about the impersonation. That's me. And I don't want to do it now just because I don't want Dan to be embarrassed, so don't worry about that, Dan. I'll probably do it afterwards. But yeah, first time on Top 5 and really looking forward to it. I tried to come on the other times, but my computer wasn't working. I got that all fixed, and I'm just ready to talk disaster films. And they're definitely hit or miss.
Stephen.
Stephen Billings here again for the 20th time we've done 20 show. Let's just say we've done 7 shows. This is our 7th show, but we know I'll be on 13 more times. So disaster films. I mean, who doesn't love a good sit down with popcorn CGI fest of a disaster film? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those movies. Disaster films. I mean, and I think I can speak for these guys. And when I say you don't go into it thinking there's going to be an Oscar-worthy performance by an actor or an actress in disaster films. There are a few, and you might see a couple of them on my list. I don't know about these guys, but on my list, you might see a couple Oscar-worthy performances in disaster films. But it's just about just eating the popcorn, drinking the soda, watching things explode, watching the earth disintegrate or whatever, tidal waves or whatever you want to call it, earthquakes, or that's what we're talking about when we're talking about disasters, not alien invasions. So you're not going to see any movies where aliens are destroying the earth, because that's technically an alien invasion movie and not a disaster movie, even though there might be some disasters going on. So with that being said, I'm going to start it off with Andrew this week. Andrew, what is your number 5 disaster film?
Okay, so like I said, I had a tough time because there's a lot of crossover between, like you were saying, alien invasion, post-apocalyptic movies. So for number 5, I went with kind of a nostalgia pick for me, and that is Dante's Peak from 1997, starring James Bond, Pierce Brosnan, and Sarah Connor, Linda Hamilton. And I remember watching this in the late 90s, late one night, perhaps on pay cable or whatever, and I just remember being fascinated by this idea of what would I do if all of a sudden a volcano would erupt in my town and there was just chaos and volcanic ash everywhere. And for some reason, my 10-year-old mind couldn't wrap my head around what I would do in that moment. So I picked Dante's Peak. It's not a fantastic movie in any stretch. I mean, most disaster movies aren't made to be great films. They're just made to be entertaining. And it was very interesting because I believe this came out, well after Terminator 2 with Linda Hamilton, and of course, right after GoldenEye with Pierce Brosnan. And I think it may have come out the same year as Tomorrow Never Dies, the second Pierce Brosnan film. But I just remember being highly entertained and kind of fascinated by volcanic eruptions because they can kind of still happen today.
Yeah, I think, that was the year where we had, some years we get these movies where there's 2 of the same movie coming out. That year we had Volcano and Dante's Peak. it was like the volcano eruption movie here or something like that. But okay, Billy, you're up. What is your number 5?
It's funny you mentioned Volcano because that's actually my number 5.
Wow.
And that's mostly because of Tommy Lee Jones. Now I know the dude is notoriously terrible to interview, but I found the film just really fun, and the burn effects. You gotta understand, my dad's a fireman, so I know what I've seen some bad burn victims, and so is he. Like he's shown me that and all that stuff. But yeah, Volcano does a really good job, even though there's some obvious tricks to it. The volcano scenes and everybody working together, it's just fun, and just seeing grumpy Tommy Lee Jones is always a delight.
Yeah, I think as the years have gone by. Billy, what is your number 5 disaster film?
You mean Steven?
Steven.
Yeah, I just said mine.
Steve, I'm sorry, I apologize.
That Alzheimer's is coming in quick.
Yeah, early onset.
Steven, I'm Steven, guys, and once again, my number 5, you're either a Volcano or a Dante's Peak guy. And that is my number 5. Number 5, Dante's Peak. Pierce Brosnan, he's awesome, man. Look, I mean, like I said, you're either Volcano or Dante's Peak. To me, out of the two, Dante's Peak, realism to it, and yeah, there's nothing wrong with a fun, crazy volcano movie where somehow the volcano got in the middle of the city, and it's crazy. But, there's nothing wrong with that. But to me, Dante's Peak just captured more of that fear of if that actually happened. And I like the actors more. I like Pierce Brosnan and Linda Hamilton way more than I like Tommy Lee Jones. He's acquired taste. But yeah, Dante's Peak, fun movie, 1997. It's right. The 90s is a great disaster movie decade. So
yeah, there was a lot of schlocky disaster movies out in the 90s. And I'm going to actually name one right now. 1998's classic, Armageddon.
Oh, man. That's a very mixed bag.
Number five.
Number 5, because I got 4 better movies than Armageddon on my list. But Armageddon, meteors are coming towards the Earth. That is a disaster. And, of course, we got Ben Affleck, Bruce Willis. I mean, this thing's got all kinds of people in it. I mean, it's got everybody in it. I mean, it's one of the classic. I mean, these are the movies in the 90s that they made. You're not going to get the greatest performances. You're not going to get, but you're just going to get just a crazy ride from beginning to end. There's a little bit of a love story in there. I think Liv Tyler's in there with Ben Affleck, and there's a little bit of a love story going on with her. But yeah, Armageddon. I mean, you're just gonna absolutely hate movies if you don't like Armageddon. This movie's a fun ride. So I had number 5. I had Armageddon, and I'm sure I'm gonna take a lot of crap from these guys because I had that 5. But I have 4 better disaster films ahead of this. So, all right, we're gonna go back to Andrew. What is your number 4?
My number 4 is Twister, directed by John DeBont. And yet again, it's another film I watched back then when I was really young, and I'm like, what would I do if I got caught up in Twisters, or if I chased Twisters for a career? And great cast with Helen Hunt, Bill Paxton, the late great Philip Seymour Hoffman. It's a really interesting, and yet again another interesting film because it's kind of based in science in the sense like there are actual storm chasers. There are people who chased Twisters for a living, and there's like a science behind it. So it's a very fun film. I remember being thoroughly entertained by it, and Helen Hunt's a great actress. So is Bill Paxton.
No, yeah, I absolutely agree. You might see a little bit about Twister a little bit later from somebody on this list. I'm not saying who. But Billy, what is your number 4?
Okay, before we move on, I just got a preference. I love Dante's Peak as well. I think it's just as fun as Volcano. I love them both. And just to disprove Steven's earlier statement, not all people, but there are some. But no, my number 4, again, it's funny you mentioned Bill Paxton because, and again, it is associated with fire. Technically, this is a disaster film, Backdraft.
Nice.
I don't know if Dan's gonna be okay with that, but yeah, I'm gonna say Backdraft because Bill Paxton is great. It is very realistic, actually. I mentioned earlier that my dad is a fireman, and a backdraft is an actual thing that does happen. It's Ron Howard directed, and even though it should be higher, I love it. And the final scene just it tears me up, man.
No, I mean it's a great movie. I think fires are considered disasters. If something catches on fire, whether it be a building or whatever, fire is a disaster. So
it's very scary.
Yeah, and it's very scary. So anything involving fires, I include as part of disasters. And there's one of the greatest disaster movies of all time. I don't know if anybody's got it on their list. I'm not going to say it because I'm not going to spoil it if somebody's got it on their list. So we'll talk about that when that pops up. All right, now, Steven, what is your number 4?
My number 4 is a fun, what I like to call the other Michael Bay, Roland Emmerich's 2004 Day After Tomorrow. This movie is one of the stupidest movies I've ever seen, but it is also one of the funnest movies in the sense of a disaster movie. They create this storm that can freeze things. Basically, you got Dennis Quaid, who is this climatologist, and he's trying to tell everybody that, hey, the weather, if we don't start cleaning up our atmosphere, things are going to happen, and it happens too fast. And basically, this storm that just starts freezing everything just starts passing over parts of the United States and across the world. And it's just a really fun movie, and it really does create a lot of good tension in some scenes. And, Jake Gyllenhaal also plays his son in that film, and I love Jake Gyllenhaal no matter whether it's him at that age or now. To me, it's just a really fun movie, and it does something really good that a lot of I don't think a lot of disaster films that are at this scope do, and that is the scope. Like, they don't all really get the scope right, and I think that they do a really good job in Day After Tomorrow catching that scope of the whole world being involved in this disaster.
No, you're right about it. I mean, I have The Day After Tomorrow on my honorable mentions, and it's once again what I try to preface at the beginning. There's some disaster film, you just go in there and you're just having fun. You're not trying to get any kind of intellectual entertainment out of it. You're just going to watch the world blow up, and then you're going to walk out and get into your car because the world's not blowing up. And that's what's fun about these types of movies. I'm going to go an actual true story, a movie based on a true story about where I come from, New England, and it was an absolute classic as far as I'm concerned. It's called The Perfect Storm with George Clooney and Mark Wahlberg. Well, we got him in Deepwater Horizon. Why not him in a movie where a couple boats get caught between 2 hurricanes? What are the odds of a boat getting caught between 2 hurricanes? Not one, but 2 hurricanes.
It sounds perfect, Dan.
The perfect storm. And this actually happened. And so you got these guys doing Boston accents, New England accents, which one of the people on here can do a very good Boston accent, but he's not from Boston. The other's actually from Boston or New England, Rhode Island, whatever you call it. So some of us know how to know when those guys were talking the way they're talking, Mark Wahlberg and George Clooney, that they really do nail the New England accent. But the movie itself was a crazy, crazy story. If you haven't seen it, once again, sometimes in disaster movies there are sad endings. It came out in 2000, so I'm not really spoiling anything. I mean, I'd be shocked if people haven't seen this film. It's an absolute classic. So I got The Perfect Storm on my top 5 at number 4. Now I'm going to ask a question. I always ask a question between the third and the fourth on our list, and so I just decided I'm going to ask you guys your opinion of the overall idea of disaster films and overall, should we keep making these types of movies? Are they good for the public to see these kinds of movies? Obviously, Sully wasn't really a disaster film, but it had a disaster in it when a plane crashes, even though it crashed into the Hudson River. And then you had Deepwater Horizon, which a oil rig, not rig, oil. What's the word? Oil platform blows up. So those are disasters. But should we keep doing these kinds of movies? Who would be an actor or a director you guys would want to see do something like this? I will start with Andrew.
Should we keep making them? They probably will, regardless of what I think. But I mean, disaster movies are just great popcorn movies. Thing is, they're starting to realize that they're not serious movies, or maybe like Hollywood's starting to realize they're not serious movies, because they literally just came out with a movie wasn't it called The Storm, where literally it was just a movie that was a natural disaster and it was a storm. So they're not really underselling it anymore. As for who should be making these, I mean, that's a tough question. Like, I don't want to see a true auteur make a disaster movie. I don't want to see a Chris Nolan make a disaster movie. That would just seem ridiculous. I'm assuming the acting would be fantastic, but I mean, how much could you take it seriously when you realize that these are unserious moments? You know what I mean? Non-serious moments.
No, I agree. All right, Billy, what do you think about this topic? Do you think this is a good thing? I mean, is it good of movies to see these kinds of movies? Do we always need serious fare, or do we need these kinds of, like Billy, Stephen and Andrew both said already, popcorn flicks just to go there and just watch the world get destroyed?
No, I think we do need these films because, I mean, I think nowadays film critics are just becoming very cynical, bitter, picky people, and they just need to learn how to just sit back, have a good time. We need our Independence Days, or we need our Dante's Peaks, all that stuff. And they just need to learn not just to take everything seriously. And I would totally want to see an auteur take on a disaster film, because I looked up some disaster films, and Lars Van Trier, who, love him or hate him, he's technically an auteur, he did a disaster film. And I forget what it was about, but it was like, knowing Lars Van Trier, it was pretty nasty.
That disaster film is Nymphomaniac.
Well, yeah, that could be one as well. But no, I think we totally need these films, because we just need films where people can turn off their brains, just not be as critical of the story or the acting. And I'm using quotation marks because it's the same story most of the time. But I mean, it works. And as long as the actors and the director are having a good time, I'm going to have a good time. Given the opportunity never mind. Basically, if they don't go overboard with the hamminess, or give us bad CG like Birdemic, it's not going to be fun. But yeah, if we have like an Independence Day, then go for it.
Stephen, what do you think about all this?
I think like any like genre, you could say the disaster movie genre is kind of like horror. Horror can be really good when it's done well, and disaster movies can be done when it's done well. And I think that definitely every genre, disaster movies included, has a place in film. You shouldn't take away anything. Nothing should be shunned out of the zeitgeist of film. I think with disaster films, I wouldn't mind seeing any kind of director do it. I think that if you had somebody like a Nolan or somebody do it, it would definitely be more character based and not so much about the disaster itself. And I think that that's what needs to happen to these genres like disaster films and horror films, is they need to make them more about the characters and about what they're going through and not so much about the spectacle of the disaster, and I think that there's room for that. And I think that I would like to see that. I'd like to see a Ridley Scott, do a hurricane movie or, something like that. I think there's always room for that.
I think the best disaster movies are ones that are based on real events, because you can encapsulate a very human story at the center of it. Like Skip just brought up with The Perfect Storm. That's a real event with real people. So it brings it back down to earth, even though it's a very kind of large, disastrous event.
No, you're right. I'm glad you brought that up, Andrew. No, disaster films are fun. I mean, we specifically in the summer. You know what I mean? I know it's not going to be on my list, so I'm not going to spoil it. But San Andreas, I enjoyed San Andreas for what it was. Is it a great film? No. Is The Rock just being who The Rock is? Yep, he sure is. And guess what? I love The Rock for doing what he does best. And he just handed up. He acted all big and muscle and macho in San Andreas, and it made a few bucks. The movie didn't tank because it wasn't trying to pretend like it was something it wasn't. And, the whole theory of how California is going to fall into the ocean because of the San Andreas fault, that was a great idea for someone to turn that into a movie. And then they weren't trying to make it some kind of Oscar contender or anything like that. You know what I mean? So we do have good examples of disaster films that work, and then there are plenty of real life stories that can be turned into movies. So you have a mix of fictional stories and true stories for disasters. So you guys gave a really good insight into it. All right, so now we're going to go back to Andrew. And what is your number 3 disaster film, Andrew?
My number 3, speaking of realistic, real stories, The Impossible, that came out in 2012, that takes place during the tsunami in Thailand during the mid-2000s. And the film stars Naomi Watts and Ewan McGregor, who are a married couple who are on vacation in Thailand during the tsunami. And they are swept away in it, and they get separated, and it's all about them having to save their sons and reunite. And it's a very serious, harrowing tale about survival and kind of human integrity and stuff like that. And Naomi Watts, who I was always viewed as a fantastic actress, gives a fantastic performance, specifically as a mother, being separated from her children and seeing her children in such a dire situation. Ewan McGregor also, I think, is a fantastic actor as well. So it is a very serious movie that I actually waited a few years to watch because I knew it would be a very serious subject to cover, because it was a recent tragic event.
No, I agree 100%, Andrew. And you might hear that movie pop up again before this show is over. All right, Billy, what's your number 3?
What you're suggesting is not entirely impossible. And I found out that Tom Holland was actually one of the kids, Spider-Man. And my number 3 is a film that my master, Mark Tordai, absolutely hates. I mean, just absolutely hates it. And truth be told, I hate some parts of it, but it's Titanic. And, I mean, you want to talk about it's a real-life thing, but they did it way after everybody that was actually on the Titanic passed away. So it was okay, so we could be big and summary, not summary like that, but blockbuster and be okay with the story. We just make a simple love story with it. But like some of the CG still really holds up, and without Titanic, we would not have Leonardo DiCaprio or Kate Winslet, and it is a very, very important movie for that. We also wouldn't have James Cameron making as much money as he does now, because that was the highest grossing film, I think, for a long time. And yeah, while the story is really simple and cliche, and some of the overacting from Billy Zane is really, really funny, it's still a pretty good film at its core, and it does have some heart.
Yeah, I don't know about anybody else, but I definitely like Titanic, and you might hear more about that in the future here. Steven, what's your number 3?
My number 3 is one we've already talked about, Perfect Storm. Perfect Storm is just, when you take it down to a simple, kind of what we were talking about disaster films that, simplify it, make it about the characters. And this is one of the examples of that, where you got these 3 guys on a boat, and it just simplifies it. And it's just one of them things that you see it coming, obviously, because you know going into the movie what kind of movie you're seeing, but it's one that builds up that dread, kind of like this Deepwater Horizon. It really builds up that dread until it finally hits. And this movie just does that really well, and some great performances and some great visuals. Because doing water is not easy, and it's just a perfect. No, it's not a perfect movie, but it's a good movie. It's a really good disaster movie.
As you know, I already talked about it. I love it. It takes place in my neck of the woods from where I'm from and where Andrew is from, and I love movies that take place in New England, especially a true story like that. I love Mark Wahlberg and George Clooney.
Well, real quick, I'm sorry, Dan. Also, yes, they have good accents in the movie, but I will say with Deepwater Horizon, he does not have a good accent in that movie. I'll move past that.
Yeah.
But somebody in the movie does have a good accent. We won't spoil who's got the good accent in that movie, because it seemed like only one person in the movies actually got a Louisiana accent. I don't know how good it is. I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah, it is pretty good.
Yeah. So my number 3 is Andrew's number 4, I believe, Twister. I saw this movie in the theater when I was a teen. It came out in 1996, so I was about 20 years old when it came out. And I'll tell you what, this is one of those movies where you just go in there and say, oh, cool, a movie about chasing tornadoes, and Bill Paxton and Helen Hunt and all these people. And it came out in May, and that was when they really started getting this whole summer blockbuster season going, and with movies like Gladiator and Twister and those types of movies. And I really enjoyed Twister. It just you can't go into it trying for it to be very serious. I mean, at first when I first saw it, I was just like, oh, cool, this is great. And I did kind of take it serious. But then as years go by, I didn't take it as serious. So, I got Twister at number 3. We're going to go to Andrew and see what his number 2 is.
My number 2 is Contagion, directed by Steven Soderbergh from 2011. I consider it a disaster movie. I may be cheating on this one, but I mean, it is about something that affects a lot of people, which is kind of what a disaster movie is at its core most of the time. And the film contains a huge cast of people. Matt Damon, Kate Winslet, Gwyneth Paltrow, Jude Law, Lawrence Fishburne, John Hawkes. It is just Marion Cotillard is also in it. It is just a very interesting film that'll make you really respect germaphobes and people who don't like to get sick or be around sick people because stuff like that is very difficult to defend against and detect, and a lot of people aren't aware of how much germs and bacteria and disease lives around us all the time. And it's a very frightening film on a very real level, considering that the population problem is growing and growing, and we're constantly around people. So you just never know. And Steven Soderbergh is personally one of my favorite directors. I've seen so many of his films, and he's one of my personal film heroes for me.
Well, I'll tell you what. I had Contagion on my honorable mentions, Andrew, and I do consider epidemics to be a disaster. And before you came on, we were talking before the show started, and I was like, epidemics. I consider an epidemic to be a disaster, and Contagion, I would say, is probably one of the best. That and Outbreak are probably two of the best movies about epidemics. And I actually had a friend who worked on Contagion, and he had told me all about this film before it even came out. So I was like hyped to go see it. And what a great, great film. And the thing is, if you go look up the science behind the film Contagion, it can actually happen that way. Remember a few years ago, we had it. It was called the bird flu, and the bird flu was a real thing. And we also have the swine flu. So you have these kinds of things that can actually happen. Obviously, this goes to that next level to make it an entertaining movie. But everybody in the movie took what they were doing seriously and made this movie a real serious film. And with people like Matt Damon, Gwyneth Paltrow, John Hawkes, Miriam Cotillard, Lawrence Fishburne. I mean, Kate Winslet. What a great, great cast. I know I didn't pick this, Andrew. I just decided I was going to talk about it since Andrew brought it up. I do really love Contagion. And Steven Soderbergh is a great, great filmmaker. You're right. All right, Billy. Sorry to do that interruption, guys.
It's okay. And Steven Soderbergh, yeah, he's the guy who did Magic Mike, right? That's all I know him from.
He also did the Oceans movies.
He did do the. I've actually never seen the Oceans movies, so that's probably why. I'm getting on it. I see you shaking your head, Dan. No, but my number 2 happens to also be coincidentally. All of my picks seem to be very coincidental, and I swear I did not plan it this way. But my number 2 is The Andromeda Strain, based on the Michael Crichton novel, 1971, directed by one of the greatest directors ever, Robert Wise. And one of the stars, I like to laugh a little bit because I'm a big Superman fan. And one of the stars is named James Olsen, obviously, Jimmy Olsen, Superman's pal. But no, it's a very, very tension-filled film. And you were talking about the science, and the science is also really good because it deals with disease. And they explain, like, basically how a disease can get as bad as it can, and that's mutation. And it's really just, like, very eerie, honestly, to think that something as simple like you brought up, like the swine flu, that actually was something that only affected pigs, but it mutated and affected humans. It's really scary to think that disease can actually turn deadly. And it's a great film all around. And if you've never seen it, I highly recommend seeing The Andromeda Strain.
No, I agree, Billy. All right, Stephen, what is your number 2?
My number 2 is one we've talked about already, and that is Twister. Twister, it's also, if you don't know, produced by Spielberg, so obviously it's going to have some awesomeness. And it's, well, let me take that back. Not everything produced by Spielberg is awesome. But this was 90s Spielberg, so yeah, we had a better chance. But yeah, this is a fun movie, man. I mean, just Philip Seymour Hoffman alone, just you're in the suck zone, like just stuff like that. It's a very fun, like it's one of the movies that kind of defines, like it almost makes it hard for anybody else wanting to try to do a movie about tornadoes, because it's like everybody thinks of Twister, and it's just hard to, I mean, when they did that one movie, I think it was The Storm, that was about a twister, and it was just nobody cared because Twister's so awesome. and Bill Paxton and Helen Hunt. And it's got some great visuals for the time. I mean, it's a little dated, but it's still got some good visuals for the time. And even though some of the ways that the tornado works in the movie isn't completely, accurate, it's still a fun movie. And definitely, if you haven't seen it, you should watch it.
Yep, obviously, Andrew and I agree on that, Stephen. All right, I'm going to do what Andrew, he keeps, it seems to have, I don't know, somebody picked Titanic. I can't remember which, but Titanic is my number 2.
That was me.
That was Billy?
Yeah, it was my number 3.
Okay. I got Titanic. I mean, when you have what's considered the largest ocean liner in the world, and it's unsinkable. It was considered unsinkable, and a little iceberg sunk this ship. And this is a mix of fiction and fact. Obviously, we know the year, the so forth, the time, all that sort of stuff that the Titanic sank. I think it was 2012. I mean, not 1912. 1912, I meant. But the characters in the movie are fictional. The romance, the craziness between the love affair, the love triangle, and all that stuff, that's fiction. But I think what James Cameron did was add the fiction to the fact. It made a great film. Obviously, at the time, it was it made more money than any film ever. And it stayed that way for, I think, 7 years until Avatar beat it. Hey, is there a coincidence there? Yes. James Cameron directed both films. I mean, the guy knows how to make money. He basically prints money. I mean, so I knew people, and I'm sure we all knew people, that went and saw this movie. Like, I know girls that I knew back when I was, younger, that went and saw this like 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 times when movie tickets were cheaper and there wasn't as many things to do with your time back in the day. So they all fell in love with Leo and Kate Winslet's love affair, and so that's the reason why it made so much money. People kept on going to see it. And one thing about great movies is people go back again and again and again. So there's something about Titanic that makes it a great film, and it's easily one of the 5 top greatest disaster films of all time. I mean, you're going to be a complete moron if you don't think so. I mean, obviously, people have their own personal opinions, but this movie's a great film, no matter how you look at it. That's my opinion, but I still think it's one of the greatest. So now we're gonna go to Andrew. Andrew, what was the very first disaster film you ever saw? Do you remember seeing when you were a little kid, like something you're like, wow, that's crazy. What the heck is that? Anything like that?
I'm trying to think about what would constitute a disaster film that I saw as a child. Oh, man. I'm going to have to go with my number 5 pick, Dante's Peak, because I saw it when I was around 10 or 11, and that's a very young age. I can't remember what I saw before that. That would count as a disaster film. I don't think Disney was making very many disaster films back in the early 90s. So I have to go with Dante's Peak as an early one, and Twister. Actually, Twister, which came out before Dante's Peak, so probably Twister. All
right, Billy, what was the first disaster film you ever saw?
Oh my God, I'm going to show my age because I saw them in the early 2000s, but there wasn't many films I could see because I was like 6 or 7 maybe, but because I'm 20 now, so
so young.
I know. I'm a youngin', but I gotta say Poseidon. It's with Kurt Russell. I think it's a remake of the Poseidon Adventure, I believe. Yeah. And it dealt with like the ship. It was already sunk, but it was upside down and everything, and it scared the shit out of me. And that's why I really, really hate drowning scenes in movies because, I mean, I just don't like it. but that was probably like the first real like disaster film. It's either that, and then I didn't see it in theaters, but The Day After Tomorrow was one of the earliest disaster films I saw. But the first film I saw in theaters was Poseidon, and yeah, it scarred me.
All right.
Not because of the film, just because I'm terrified of drowning. So
I don't blame you. Stephen, what was the very first disaster film you saw as a child or a teen or whatever?
I have to agree with Andrew. It's probably Twister. I think me and Andrew are about the same age. It was right there in the my early life. It's something my parents let me watch, and I think it was actually a PG movie, so I think it was easy for us to watch. But speaking of Poseidon, when that Poseidon remake came out, I was just about to go on a cruise, and we decided to go see it the day before we went on the cruise, which was awesome. The girls that were all going didn't like the idea, but it was okay. We loved it.
Well, I've said it before. I'm a little older than you guys, so I grew up watching some of the classic 70s disaster films, and I did see the Poseidon Adventure. And I'm telling you right now, guys, this is an awful, awful, awful movie. But it had a who's who of people. It was had so many Gene Hackmans in there. There's so many just great character actors that you know of today. If you just want some laughs, just go watch the original Poseidon Adventure. But the other one was The Towering Inferno. This is Steve McQueen's in there. And this movie is a unbelievable movie. The Towering Inferno. If you have not seen The Towering Inferno, it is a phenomenal movie. I know the director is. I know if I say the wrong name, I'm going to be upset. So I'm not going to say who the director was. I think I know who the director was, but I'm not going to say it. But yeah, The Towering Inferno and the Poseidon Adventure. And a lot of people love Airplane. Of course, I saw Airplane when I was a kid. It's more of a comedy than a disaster film, but I know it's considered a disaster film because it's about crashing airplane. But all right, so let's go with Andrew. And what is your number one disaster film, Andrew?
Oh, speaking of The Towering Inferno, that's my number one disaster movie. Came out in 1974, just a massive cast. I'll just list a couple: Paul Newman, Steve McQueen, Faye Dunaway, William Holden. Mostly it's my number one because I love films from the 1970s, and Paul Newman is my favorite actor of all time. But it's just a very interesting movie, kind of almost futuristic in a way, where you have, the tallest building in the world. What happens if it's poorly made, so therefore when it catches on fire, people are trapped inside? It's a very kind of simple but almost futuristic type of storyline, and it's very interesting how the fire almost takes on a life of its own in the film, how it's its own character, as if it's the villain of the story, when actually fire is inanimate. It doesn't have a mind of its own, but in this film it feels like it has a mind of its own.
Yeah, wow. I'm glad you have that at number one, Andrew. That's great to see you have such a classic. Billy, what's your number one?
This does count. I'm just saying, but it's it's Jaws. And why is it a disaster? Because it's a giant effing killer shark that's killing people, mostly young guys and dudes in rafts, and then that one dude who's just like, "Hey guys, what's up?" But no, it's a glorified B movie, and it's sort of an accidental. It's actually no, it's not sort of. It's an accidental hit because the shark wouldn't work, and that worked to the film's advantage because you don't see the shark that often, and it just gives you this suspense that it could be at any moment, and then it pops up right when you don't want to, or out of nowhere. There's just so many great scenes, and it's still legitimately terrifying. Like the scuba diving scene with the head, I could not watch that as a kid. I would run away screaming. I hated it, and it's also just one of the best made films ever. And the score to Roy Scheider, Robert Shaw, Richard Dreyfuss, all those guys. There is some bad acting in there, but overall, it's just one of the best disaster films, and many people don't think of it like that. Many people think of it as a horror film, and it is, but it's also a disaster because this shark just ruins this town. And I fall in love with it every single time I watch it. And if you've never seen Jaws, well, I really don't know if I can take you seriously. That's my number one, Jaws.
Well, I mean, the thing, and that's what I love about film. You know, it's all subjective. Billy considers Jaws a disaster film. I consider it a horror film. But we all on this list, I think, can consider it an absolute classic. I'm sure we all love Jaws in one way or another. All right, Steven, what is your number one?
Well, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to call myself a moron because I am not putting Titanic on my list. I'm going to go ahead and put Armageddon. Okay, I looked at my list differently. You know, I've never seen Tower of Inferno. I wanted to watch it. Actually, a good one to watch because I've heard great things. But to me, I looked at this list and tried to look at it more as the fun disaster films and what I got the most entertainment out of. And to me, Armageddon's Michael Bay's like, besides maybe like The Rock, it's his best movie. And it's literally that great thing of we love movies like Oceans where you get the team together. And that's so fun. And this idea of this asteroid coming and having to try to stop it. And of course, instead of just teaching the astronauts how to drill, they teach oil drillers how to be astronauts. That's the easier way, I guess. But you know, it's just so ridiculous, but it's so fun and it's so well done. And of course, Aerosmith. You don't want to miss a thing. You don't want to miss this movie. Okay? You don't want to miss this movie. It's so much fun. Owen Wilson, Michael Clark Duncan, who's late Michael Clark Duncan. You know, Will Smith. I'm sorry, not Will Smith. Bruce Willis. They're almost the same. You know, it's just such a gigantic, awesome cast, and once again, kind of like Dante's Peak, you're either an Armageddon guy or a Deep Impact guy, and I think Armageddon's obviously the better movie. I'm sorry, Morgan Freeman, you don't win in Deep Impact. I'm sorry, Bruce Willis wins. The whole cast wins. Michael Bay wins. Armageddon number one.
No, I mean, I understand where you're going with your list, Stephen. I mean, Armageddon, I had it on my list, so obviously I understand where you're coming from. But I had to go with the film that I had to go with because I just felt it was such a compelling story. And Andrew had it on his list. It's called The Impossible. This is a true story about the tsunami, and all the actors that are in the movie were all British, but guess what? They actually weren't British. They were Spanish people on vacation. And in December of 2004, close-knit family, Maria, played by Naomi Watts, Henry, played by Ewan McGregor, and their 3 sons began their winter vacation in Thailand. But the day after Christmas, idyllic holiday turns to an incomprehensible nightmare when a terrifying roar rises from the depths of the sea, followed by a wall of black water that devours everything in its path. Though Marie and her family face their darkest hour, unexpected displays of kindness and courage ameliorate their terror. I mean, doesn't that just get you all excited right there? I mean, are you kidding me? And Tom Holland, Spider-Man. He's in this movie. He's a kid in the
Goes-
movie. And I think, honestly, when I say Oscar-worthy performances, Naomi Watts, I feel, and I feel very strongly about this. I know a lot of people are going to disagree that Jennifer Lawrence for Silver Lining Playbook was the better performance that year. I feel very strongly that Naomi Watts got robbed, but she clearly gave the better performance in a better movie. And when you guys are talking about directors you want to see do a disaster film, how about Juan Antonio Bayona? Guess what movie he's got coming out this Christmas? A Monster Calls. So a lot of people, you don't know who these people are. You don't know what. Then they direct a movie, and they direct another movie. And then all of a sudden, they became an auteur or a name that people like, oh, I can't wait to see. Well, go back and see The Impossible if you haven't seen it. This guy is one of those directors who is on the hot list of directors to get a lot of projects. And A Monster Call, coming out of the Toronto Film Festival and a couple of the other film festivals, is getting all kinds of buzz. So I have The Impossible at my number one, and I just felt very, very strongly about that. And Naomi Watts and her performance. So this is our top 5 disaster films. I want to thank everybody who is watching or who might watch this episode in the future. And I just want to say, Andrew and the rest of the panel, where can you be found? Starting with Andrew.
You can find me on Twitter at Cabzilla06 and find my YouTube channel at Cabzilla Productions.
Billy?
You can find me on Twitter at BBusterBill, and you can find me on Facebook at Screen Junkies Fans. I'm an admin on there. And really, Snapchat, Instagram, I do all of that stuff, and it's just Billy Pollahan. But yeah, I'm mostly on Twitter.
All right, Stephen?
You can find me on Facebook, just Stephen Billings, and also I have a channel, Film Club Central. We do many shows. We have the Film Club movie show as our main show. We have Not Another Geek podcast. We have Tromataries. We have a bunch of different stuff going on. Also, Top 5 Weekly. This show is posted on that channel, and also you can find us on iTunes and get all that listening going.
And I can be found under my name, Dan Skip Allen, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Pinterest. And I also do a podcast called Best Damn Movie Show with my co-host Vincent LaSpada. I call him Vinny. And you can go on there and see all my movie reviews. And I'm going to be doing reviews of Luke Cage and Westworld this week on the latest episode. So if you want to listen to what I have to say about those 2 TV shows, go on there. And this, obviously, the Top 5 Weekly is posted on the Best Damn Movie Show podcast channel and Film Club Facebook and podcast channels. So you can go to a bunch of different places to find the Top 5 Weekly. And I just want to say thank you once again to my co-hosts, my panel. I say co-hosts, but my panelists this week, Andrew, Billy, and Stephen. And we're going to be doing female-led thrillers next week in honor of Girl on a Train. So if anybody would like to be on the Top 5 Weekly and you are a fan of female-led thrillers, then please message me on Facebook. So for my panelists and I, thank you and good night.